The Melbourne Sandbelt boasts one of the densest concentrations of great golf courses in the world. Royal Melbourne, West and East courses, Kingston Heath, Victoria, and then if you travel down the Mornington Peninsula, you'll encounter some exceptional modern linksy courses like St. Andrews Beach. Last December, I took a very special trip to this region. I got to know the courses, I got to know the people, and I was bowled over by the experience. So today on Designing Golf, we're talking about the Sandbelt, its history, its golf, its culture, and how to go about planning a trip there. My guests are going to be Harley Cruz and Lukas Michel, both Australian golf architects, both intimately familiar with this region. Let's get into it. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. There are certain regions in the world of golf that can go by very concise, sometimes 2 or 3 word names. These regions have exceptional golf, often because history and geology conspired to make the areas wonderfully well suited to the game. You had the right people at the right time and the right pieces of land. So a few of these regions would include East Lothian in Scotland. There are a bunch of them in Scotland. You have St. Andrews. You have South Ayrshire, where Royal Troon and Prestwick are. You have the Highlands with Royal Dornoch, Brora, and now Cabot Highlands. Scotland is a special place. Outside of Scotland, though, there's the Heathlands, south of London. There's Long Island in the U.S. There's the Monterey Peninsula. There's the North Carolina Sandhills and the Nebraska Sandhills. And then you have what I would consider one of the most fascinating regions of golf in the world, way over in Australia. I'm talking about the Sandbelt, or the Melbourne Sandbelt to be more specific. And that's the topic I'm taking on today in this episode of Designing Golf. Now, quick pronunciation note. Australians say Melbourne. I say Melbourne. Am I mispronouncing the name of the city? I don't think so. And that's because Australians don't really pronounce their R's. Right? The Australian accent is a non-rhotic accent. Often R's toward the ends of words are not pronounced. I speak West Coast American English. I do pronounce my R's pretty much wherever they are. So, Australians say car park. I say car park, right? Or I would really say parking lot. So I think it's okay for me to say Melbourne. If I said Melbourne, it might feel like I was trying too hard, and at least I'm not saying Melbourne. So that's the compromise that I'm making with pronunciation here. All right, let's do some very quick and dirty history of Melbourne, the city, and how golf started there. So Melbourne was a gold rush city. In 1850, it had a population of about 29,000. But then gold was discovered in Victoria, the state or province of Victoria in 1851. And this triggered a massive migration to Victoria. Many arrived through Port Phillip Bay, which is where Melbourne is located. So Melbourne really became the gateway to the Victorian goldfields in much the same way that San Francisco had become the gateway to the California goldfields. So by 1854, Melbourne's population had increased to over 80,000. And as in San Francisco, it wasn't the miners who ended up benefiting most from the discovery and extraction of gold. It was Melbourne's business class, the city's merchants, bankers, and businessmen. Also in very good shape were the landowning gentry in the surrounding area. Sheep farming and wool production remained one of Melbourne's signature durable industries alongside banking. So Melbourne continued to grow through the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. The 1880s, in fact, are widely recognized as the city's peak. The population reached and exceeded 400,000 people, which made Melbourne one of the biggest cities in the British Empire. This was the era of marvelous Melbourne. It was a modern, thriving metropolis with electric street lighting, a cable car network, huge commercial buildings. So this was an era of really rapid growth and prosperity. which was never going to last forever. It did come to a halt with a market crash in the 1890s. But by that point, Melbourne was established. There were still plenty of well-off people who had this new thing in history called leisure time, right? And in the 1890s, some people in the Melbourne area decided to spend a portion of their leisure time playing golf. This was around the time that golf was catching on internationally. The game had spread from Scotland to England in what the historian Michael Morrison calls the Great English Golf Boom of the 1880s. And then in the 1890s, Scottish and English emigrants exported the game to both former and current British territories like the United States and Australia. So the first golf clubs in Melbourne were founded in the 1890s. The courses were established on land just outside the city. And it's very possible, I think, that the land bust of the 1890s in Melbourne allowed for this use of land, because in the 1880s, those same properties might have been too expensive to be used for golf. So in any case, Melbourne Golf Club, later called Royal Melbourne, was founded in 1891 on a site in a suburb just south of the city named Caulfield. So this was just outside the city, just south of the city, basically. Various other golf clubs sprung up in the outlying areas of the city over the next couple of decades. But if we're talking about the story of the Melbourne Sandbelt specifically, the key event came in 1901 when Royal Melbourne relocated from Caulfield farther south, about 5 miles south, to an area called Sandringham. And this was the first time a golf club had been established in what we now know as the Melbourne Sandbelt. The Sandbelt is a geological anomaly in the Melbourne area. Most of the city and its surrounding regions sit on heavy clay soils. But in this one band along Port Phillip Bay, starting about 10 miles south of the city center, you have a very different soil profile, which turned out to be really great for golf. So to discuss the geology and vegetation and agronomy of the Sandbelt more in depth, I'm going to bring on Harley Cruz. Harley is an Australian golf architect and Melbourne native who has developed a tremendous expertise in vegetation management. So he's really the perfect person to discuss this topic with. But first, a quick word from our sponsor for this episode, Club Champion. We at Fried Egg Golf are very excited to have Club Champion as a partner again in 2025. And if you're looking to improve your game this year, Club Champion has a lot to offer you. They have the most highly trained fitters in the world. Each fitter is trained at an in-house university, and they receive continued education from manufacturers to stay up to date on all the newest innovations. These are career fitters. They fit all day, every day. There are no distractions by accessories, lessons, or anything else. This is what they do. They fit you into the golf clubs that you should be playing. Every Club Champion location has over 65 brands, which equates to nearly 70,000 different head and shaft combinations. This is the sort of menu that Club Champion fitters have access to, so they're really able to find the right stuff for you. So this is equipment for every golfer and every swing, whether you're tall, short, have a faster swing, a slower swing, whether you're a junior, senior, beginner, or pro. Club Champion can fit you into equipment that will help you shoot lower scores. So here is the offer for Designing Golf listeners. You can get a free driver or iron fitting with a club purchase using the code FRIEDEGG. That's one word, FRIEDEGG, at clubchampion.com/FRIEDEGG. Okay, so a free driver or iron fitting with a club purchase at any Club Champion location, code FRIEDEGG. All right, check it out. Let's go to my conversation with Harley Cruz. Harley Cruz, welcome to the pod. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, great, Garrett. It's excellent to be here and to follow on from my colleague in things here where I am at Eleanor Golf Club in Sydney, Lukas Michel. So
Yeah.
we're both here this week working on a project, which is good.
Later in this episode, I'm going to bring on Lukas Michel to talk about various subjects to do with Sandbelt golf, and the two of you happen to be in the same location, which worked out well for I think all of us. So Harley, I wanted to talk with you about what the Melbourne Sandbelt actually is, like geologically speaking. So
Yeah, look, good question. And Sandbelt, of course, sand, wind-blown sands. Interesting, underneath all this sand too is like a bedrock of sandstone that's like dated back 400 million years. It's pretty amazing. But I guess, wind-blown sand that came from the coast of Port Phillip Bay, and, the stronger the winds, the more the sand went inland. So it stretches, I guess, the Sandbelt's a sort of a patch of ground that sort of stretches inland probably, 10 to 15 k's thereabouts in various different parts of the coast. But underneath it all, not far from Royal Melbourne actually, is cliffs, of which withstood basically the erosion and hung in there. And that's part of the original bedrock. But and the sand of great depths. I guess sand and sand dunes been a variable thing. They can be 200 feet deep of sand, or it could be 20 centimeters deep of sand, or even less in some places. So some sandbelt golf courses have more sand than others. And with that becomes also that connection of geology, and the vegetation is also part of that mix of the sand as well.
the sand is pretty deep in the Sandbelt in certain spots, right? At Royal Melbourne, for instance.
Correct. I think on Royal Melbourne, on top of the big dunes, it's very deep. I was only there looking at an area off the side of West Course last week where some dams were dug a few years ago now, and I mean it's seriously deep there in those locations. And then you get other parts of the golf course. We're doing some work with Yarra Yarra at the moment, and it's got some good depths of sand as well. But then certain parts of that site, you might only have 3 or 4 feet, 5, 6 feet of sand, and then you hit the sort of clay underneath. And parts of Metropolitan even less again. And some cases Metropolitan even less because they sold off some of their sand back in the 60s, I think. So yeah, it's they're not all the same in terms of the massive depth of sand, I guess is the answer, that variability.
Is there a historical story here? How did this geological formation come about?
Yeah, I guess it's like all sort of dune country. It was coastal windblown sands of Port Phillip Bay, and I guess the sea level of Port Phillip Bay might have been lower at some point or higher at some point, but just nature's forces at work blowing in, washing. I think a lot of the sand was deposited by the ocean and the tidal movements on Port Phillip Bay, and it was deposited on the coast, and the wind picked it up and blew it inland, and then eventually plants would colonize the primary dunes, and then other plants would colonize inland, and the primary dunes along Port Phillip Bay, there's probably a width of, call it, a mile at most width of sand there that's young, fresh sand with less organic material in it. And it supports a very different types of species as opposed to when you get inland where you get that darker loam sand, which is organic material that's broken down in the sand, and it's a very different type of older, structured sand. And the sands are pretty fine. You imagine wind picking up the sand, the finer the sand, the further inland it would go. So, yeah, it's interesting. And it's different I'm doing work here in Sydney at the moment with Royal Sydney. It has different sand again. And if you go to Adelaide, you get the red sand. So Melbourne's famed for its dark grey sand. Sydney's got its white sands. And Adelaide, with Royal Adelaide and Kionga, Grange, Glenelg, we've all got the red sand. So... Yeah.
So in Melbourne, you've got the dark gray sand. Is there anything special about what other characteristics of it, aside from color, are unique to Melbourne sand?
Yeah, well, bunkers were dug out of that sand, right? So you've got native bunkers dug out of native sand, and that sandy loam, having those fines in it, gives it a structure that means you can get those beautiful sand-faced bunkers with those beautiful edges and lips that, anywhere from 4 inches down to sort of, a few feet deep on those edges, and it stays up and hangs together. And I guess too, historically, all the greens are built out of the native sands. And so the whole culture of Melbourne sandbelts is growing turf on these sands. But too, I guess even on one golf course, you'll have a variation of sand. So there'll be I guess there'll be a certain part of a site where historically greenkeepers have quarried sand off one spot just to have that native sand for the greens. So, and of that particular spec. So it's it's the fundamental, it's the foundation, isn't it, of that Sandbelt golf.
You mentioned it holds together really well, and that's part of the reason that you can get some of these sharp edges and shapes that people associate with sandbelt golf now. That's just because like the particles of the sand just lock together, don't they?
It's fine, yeah. It's the fines. I guess it's the angular shapes then as part of the structure, and that organic material that's in amongst it all that gives it that dark grey colour, right? And that's where it locks together. Whereas the sands, say in Sydney, in Rose Bay in Sydney, where Royal Sydney is, they're rounded sand particles, less organic, and they just don't hold together. They're not structural. They're very, very, very soft and very unstable. So yeah, it's a unique makeup in that Melbourne sandbelt, I guess, in Australian golf. Because even when you go down to the Morning Peninsula, it's a bit different again. So it's an interesting part of the foundation of that sandbelt golf.
It's part of why it's such a unique golf region, is it comes from the ground itself, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Aside from holding together nicely, and it must be nice for architects to work in this kind of sand because they put it into shapes and it sort of stays in those shapes to an extent. Why is this soil so good for golf in other senses?
Well, I guess of course, as we know, golf began on sand, and I guess it's the free draining nature of it, of sand. That fluidity of it. The natural shapes that were there, the natural green sites, the natural tee sites. I guess it's golf country, right, as we call it. So, the backstory, of course, Royal Melbourne was a couple of other locations before they got to Black Rock to where they are today, and a few other clubs the same. So ultimately, fortunately, there was a realization that sandy ground was way better to put golf on than heavy soils, and you obviously were fortunate to get some influences from the UK, and notably, of course, Dr. Alister MacKenzie. But and those influences, I guess, helped identify what's the best land for Melbourne for golf, and off they went. And it was, and you know what, too, I guess it was one of those things. It was the benefit of the fact that it probably agriculturally wasn't very fertile, so it wasn't great golf for agriculture. It wasn't great land for agriculture, but great land for golf. And in fact, many of the golf courses were on land that had been sandbelt golf courses were on land that had been cleared at some point for farming.
Yeah,
but
and the only
wasn't
farming
that
they could
productive.
do is like sheep farming. They couldn't grow things in it.
Correct. You'd be running a few sheep or a few cows and things like that. So I mean, Yarra Yarra, Metropolitan, they're all these golf courses. Woodlands was a farm, so they all had some sort of on the outsides of suburban Melbourne at that stage. It was sort of farmland and relatively cheap land, and obviously good land for golf. So yeah.
Striking similarity with Scottish links golf. Land that wasn't good for anything else, but was perfect for golf.
Exactly.
And so golfers found it, and they could use a lot of it because it wasn't super valuable. And so that's where I guess us Melbourne golfers just found this area and knew what to do with it, which is fantastic.
And you could get the grasses. You could get the grasses to grow, and you can get things to happen. I mean, these, when you think about it, the courses were built with no irrigation system existing, right? The fact that it took 3 or 4 years to grow a golf course in, like the West course took 3 or 4 years to grow until it was ready for play. The East course at Royal Melbourne, similar, 2 or 3 years. You were relying on Mother Nature to deliver some rainfall to grow grasses. So I guess it was the combination of that free draining nature, the little bit of fertility with the organic material in the sands, and just the ability for root systems to get down and just provide that great golfing ground. So it's interesting when we look back on that non-irrigation factor of establishing golf around the world, actually, I guess. But here it is, good golf country.
Wasn't easy to establish the turf at first, and that's such a common story in Golden Age golf.
Yeah.
What is the agronomy of the sandbelt? So what kinds of grasses are generally used for golf in the sandbelt?
Well, typically,
I know there's a variety, but
yeah, I mean, typically, in simple terms, sandbelt golf is what you would call Bermuda, what we call Cooch.
Cooch.
So it's basically Cooch couch or Bermuda on tees and fairways, and then bent grass on greens. And that's pretty ubiquitous through the Sandbelt. So it's couch, fairways, roughs, tees, and then bent. And of course there was a lot of experimentation with bent and lots of other backstories. But I'm probably not the best person to the story around the Sutton's mix at Royal Melbourne. But it was they were sitting there ordering some seed for some grasses to grow off a British seed supplier, and said, well, here in this climate, this, and this. So the seed supplier sent them a whole lot of different seeds, and they mixed it up as the Sutton's mix, and they threw it out there, and what grew. But so at Royal Melbourne situation, there's more than 10 varieties of different grasses in their greens. It was the shotgun mix, I guess you call it, to see what would work. Yeah. But today the golf course is still primarily couch grasses. You've got hybrid bents on greens now. Victoria next door to Royal Melbourne's got pure distinction. Peninsula Kingswood's got pure distinction. I think Commonwealth as well. And I guess the only difference probably is getting some of the fescue surrounds of greens that's happened probably in the last 15 to 20 years to get a more interesting short game around the greens. So Royal Melbourne, Woodlands have all got fescue green surrounds as well, which is a little bit more intensive because I guess the other thing, Melbourne's climate is coolish in winter. But then, sorry, I'm going to talk Celsius here, but you might get mornings down to 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees, but nothing much lower than that. And then in the middle of February in our summertime, you can get northwesterly winds coming in at 40 degrees Celsius. Dry. It's a dry heat though, but it's dry and hot. So the couch is fine in that sort of weather, and the bents can handle in there. And the fescues, there's a lot of hand watering that goes on, of course, to keep the fescues in good condition. Yeah, but that's the difference too. We've got water. Yeah. Sorry. That's the thing that we've got water now, and you can hand water. I mean, interestingly, post World War II, where there's a lot of austerity going on around in golf courses around the world, and even it was affecting the better courses. Royal Melbourne had 14 staff looking after 36 holes of golf. You can just imagine that today. So today there's a lot of extra hands to look after our golf courses, and that includes, hand watering of greens and green surrounds. Yeah.
Keeping that fescue going. And that's something you'll see at Royal Melbourne is the grass changes color as you're approaching the green. And that's, those are the fescue surrounds. And I mean, when a ball lands on it, it just leaps off of the ground, which is quite a sight to see. But yes, I mean, Melbourne is a moderate climate, and famously fescue, has some troubles in moderate damp climates, like where I live in Oregon, where it's just like a battle year round to keep fescue from being invaded by Poa annua. But in any case, those are the kind of varieties of grasses people love to hear about. Sutton's mix. When you go to Royal Melbourne, you hear about this wonderful bent grass mixture that they have in their greens, and it's basically unique to Melbourne is this Sutton's mix, and that's always fun to hear about.
Yeah, that's pretty cool actually.
Yeah, it's a really good putting surface.
Yeah, and it looks blotchy, like it looks like a bit of certain times of year. It looks like a bit of camouflage on the ground, right? But to the credit of the greenkeepers of the decades and through to today, that we've got these amazing surfaces that are not only smooth, but you talk about the bounce and the fescue. You've also got the bounce on the greens. There's a trick that Richard Forsyth, the superintendent of Royal Melbourne, does, where he bounces the ball knee height, just like a basketball.
Yeah.
And that's part of the game. Is that incredible firm green, not just the speed of the greens, but the bounce. So and that's the real craft. I think that's the real craft in amongst the superintendents, in Melbourne, is getting those firm greens and getting that bounce. I think that the modern tools, anyone can get speed, but the real craft is getting firmness.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Sutton's mix is obviously well adapted to this particular location. It's made of, it's not one of these fancy bent grasses that you bring in from somewhere else, though those seem to be working fine as well.
Yeah.
This stuff is indigenous. So when it comes to the topography of the Sandbelt, you have this is a sandy area, and so people automatically imagine a dunescape, a kind of rolling dunescape. Is that some of what you see in the Sandbelt? What varieties of topography do you see across this area?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you get a lot of again variation, as I was saying before, with the winds, and this is all created by wind and ocean depositing sand. So you got places like Royal Melbourne, Victoria. They've got a big, broad dune shape. It's not links golf dunes, which are sharp and steep. That you see on the coast, like your Barnboogles and places like that, and even 7 Mile, where you've got this more sort of classic British dunes. These are big, broad shapes, but the vertical differences are quite high, particularly say Royal Melbourne and Victoria. But then when you get to Kingston Heath, the ground's relatively flat. So it's all on sand, but it's relatively flat. Woodlands is another course that we're involved with, and it's relatively flat too. The clubhouse is up on the hill. It doesn't have as much vertical relief as Victoria or Royal Melbourne, but still, they're special golf courses too. So there's great variations of that topography and the height and the relief in the dune system. Yeah.
And it's interesting how topography, how land is, all the Sandbelt courses are wonderful and so well designed. But when you combine that design with great land, like at Royal Melbourne West, you have the top course. It's immediately clear. Oh man, this is sort of on another level. Yeah. But even a course like Kingston Heath can be so interesting on flat land. And then it gets to those last several holes, and all of a sudden you see a little more rumple happening in the land, some Royal Melbourne like forms that those holes travel over, and the routing is brilliant in the way that it takes you to that land. And so it seems like the land was so well used. Whatever these courses had, they used really well.
Absolutely, and I think too there was a skill set that was built up. After the construction of and we're talking about Morecambe, who was obviously involved with the construction of Royal Melbourne's east and west courses and the bunkering at Kingston Heath. There was a whole lot of skills were learnt through these early classic Sandbelt courses that then you see Morecambe's name pop up at Woodlands and different people. So there was a whole lot of knowledge getting built up in Melbourne, and then those trades were put out to other Sandbelt clubs. And I guess they had role models too. Of the other Sandbelt clubs had role models to look at as well. So I think there was an incredible amount of skill set. And they were working with horse and scoop, weren't they? They weren't working with dozers and excavators. So they were working with horse and scoop. And I think you can look at Kingston Heath. There was a lot more hand of man to make some of those ripples and rumbles you talk about and the bunkering, because it was relatively bland land in certain parts. And so there was certainly you can certainly see that effort. Whereas, I guess the bigger dune shapes and scale of Vic and Royal Melbourne land, you didn't have to do that work that hard and to get that sort of result. So yeah, that's interesting, really interesting stuff.
Yeah. What kinds of indigenous vegetation do you find in the Sandbelt? What is naturally there? What volunteers?
Yeah, so it's. Basically, again, there's some variation through courses, but effectively we call it the Sandbelt Heath. So on that sandy ground where it's fairly open and the tree coverage may be sparse or non-existent, then you get this, the incredible array of species of heathland species, which I guess in a way, for those watching, I mean, you've got the great heathland courses of Berkshire and Surrey around London, and that's on the Sandbelt, down their Sandbelt, right, where the soils there are sort of, a little bit acidic, and you've got a less of a tree coverage, and those sort of plants, the heathland plants of there survive. And I think, so Royal Melbourne and the Sandbelt of Melbourne, I should say, is a dryland heath, not as wet as British heathlands, but it is small plants, through to low small orchids, things that might only be 6 inches high. Incredible diversity. You might have a square metre of land, and you might have 10 different species growing in that square metre. So it's a fascinating piece of this heathland, and that heathland Kingston Heath gets its name from that local heath. You've got Yarra Yarra, Commonwealth, Woodlands, all these courses, Peninsula Kingswood. The North Course of PK has probably got the best heathland, woodland course possibly in Australia, I would say, in terms of its vegetation and just the purity of the original vegetation was there. So I think where it was drier and a bit harsher, there'd be less trees. And even if you look at a cross section of Royal Melbourne, you cross the road through into the East Course, where you got to less sand and the ground that was a bit lower to the water table, so it was a bit damper, the vegetation would change into more of a woodland character. Even some swamp gums were existing there because things were quite wet in certain parts of the low ground of Royal Melbourne on the east. So it's an amazing amount of range of flora. But then, of course, there was, I guess, when these courses were originally laid out, there was sort of hangovers from these things called the Acclimatisation Society of Melbourne, which these acclimatisation societies wanted to make the landscape look European, and they wanted to have...
In the US, it was the beautification movement.
There you go. So it's kind of like this Aussie scrub, this Aussie bush was inferior, and you had to tame it and plant cypresses and pine trees.
Right. And it was savage flora. We have to get rid of it.
Yeah. Exactly. And then came the hue, beyond that, and even post-war, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a bit of a native plant boom in this country where they started planting, shall we call them horticultural curiosities of different trees from different parts of Australia. So you'll see West Australian trees and trees from Queensland and New South Wales planted on Melbourne's Sandbelt. Well-intended plantings, but just ultimately long-term probably shouldn't be there if the course is going to be true to the land that they're on. But no, it's amazing flora, and there's some amazing people doing some great stuff managing these courses. And as Clates will say, a lot of the golf courses have gone through renovations of their architecture, tee to green. And most of the Sandbelt clubs have in the last 10, 15, 20 years been tinkering away with things. And the last piece, perhaps, of getting these golf courses to their true potential now is the vegetation side of it, where they've gone a little bit off course, as I said, not deliberately, but over successive years of planting different things, gone a little bit off course, and where the great opportunity to restore the vegetation is focusing on the landscape.
This has been part of the life's work of Mike Clayton, whom you work with, and he's made incredible progress in Australia and many other places with restoring indigenous vegetation. One of Clayton's bugaboos is the tea tree. Now, first of all, how do you spell it? Because I've seen it both TI and TEA, tree.
Yeah.
And then what is it, and what are some of the issues that it presents for golf in the Sandbelt?
Look, I've seen it spelt both ways, and you can pick up texts and they'll spell it both ways as well. I probably spell it the more modern way, which is TEA, and I think Clates might spell it with the TI, and there's people...
that's the thing. I've seen Mike spell it with TI. So I'm like, well, he probably knows, so...
Yeah, look, it's an interesting topic in itself, and it's a little bit controversial amongst some clubs at the moment, but...
Sure is.
Coast tea tree is its common name, and as the word suggests, belongs near the coast. And typically, I guess prior to settlement of Melbourne and clearing of land, coast tea tree was within 500 metres of the high tide mark, and that was about it. It didn't venture inland from there. But as land was disturbed, cleared for some of that farming I was talking, or some subdivisions for housing, it's an incredible plant because masses of white flowers in spring, typically around now, this time of the year, and with the profusion of flowers becomes a profusion of seed, and so it's a fantastic invasive plant. And I guess what's happened at the golf clubs, where over a period of 70, 80, 100 years, and the golf was often on disturbed ground, in came the tea tree. And unless there was somebody physically weeding them out and removing them, which Claude Cockford at Royal Melbourne did in the early days. He was the superintendent there at Royal Melbourne from 1936, I think, for 45 years. he would go around and pull out the occasional tea tree seedling that germinated. But it's highly invasive. But it looks great. You know, it's got this silver grey foliage, white flowers in spring, and it looks
Beautiful.
great.
Yeah.
But nothing else grows underneath it, so it precludes everything else.
Yeah.
And so with the invasion or the allowing of tea tree to colonise, it displaces all this beautiful native heath that's there. And there's plenty of nearly all the golf courses in the Sandbelt, when you go and remove some of that coastal tea tree, sitting in the ground for decades is this I call it latent seed of the heathland species just sitting there, and it pops up and germinates. And the classic example of that's probably Victoria Golf Club, which Clates knows so well. When they took the tea tree out on the 7th hole, up comes all the heath.
It looks amazing.
Yeah. And the other way of germinating and promoting this heath is to do what some of the Sandbelt clubs do, is burning, like environmental burns.
Right.
And you fell the tea tree down and create this fuel load, and you burn it, and then up comes the wonderful heath. So it's a tricky one because if you close, we sometimes speculate, if you close the gate at Royal Melbourne and went away for 5 years and come back, you'd possibly find, and most of the Sandbelt courses, you'd find the tea tree invading the whole golf course, right? It's that invasive. So even down at St Andrews Beach, where there's 118 holes there was land for another 18 holes, and 15 years ago it was just clear fields with just grasses. That within 10 or 15 years is covered with a forest of tea tree now. So it's highly invasive, but it is a subject of great debate. There's golf club members who think the tea tree is Indigenous, and that's what belongs, and that's why it's always been there, and that's what should be there. And we have a phrase amongst a few as peak tea tree, which was really probably in the 60s, early 70s, again, post World War II, where there was less resources at hand. As I said, low staff numbers. All the focus was just managing with a small amount of resources, turf, tee to green. The vegetation areas were often just forgotten about, and you just had masses and masses of tea tree that would come into all the Sandbelt courses and literally sort of take over. So there's been more recent times, I guess, there's been thinning out of tea tree. I think even at Royal Melbourne was done, for example, behind 6 West, back in the early days of having tournament golf, bringing golf and TV to golf in Australia, where they needed to get spectators to be able to stand and watch. So the rear of 6 West on the hill there, they removed all that tea tree, and it's been cleared like that for decades now. But it's a tricky one, the old tea tree, and the balance, and I guess providing members a sort of satisfaction that when you remove it, it's not all doom and gloom and devastation. There's a whole lot of other alternatives that'll actually stand beautifully in place of the tea tree.
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting story because technically it is native to the region, right? Tea tree, it grows in the area, but it doesn't. But it's not in exactly the environment that the golf courses are in. The golf courses are in more of the heathland environment. Correct. And so it's a tricky discussion to have, because it's not as though it's a pine tree from North America or something. This is native vegetation, but not in the particular locale of the habitat of the golf courses. And from my perspective, as a golf tree, it's tricky because, you hit a ball into it and you don't go in there. You right. Cannot go in there. It is gnarly, low to the ground, and there's just no recovering your ball.
That's right. Literally you would have seen it, the trunks of these trees lying along the ground, and then the canopy sticking. You've got, it's not great. You go, as you say, you go in there and you don't want to be in there. And
well, you might as well just move on. Whereas when you have the native heath, it's a penalty, and it can be hard to find your ball in the native heath. But there's some, you can walk through it. It's not it's not going to attack you. So that's that's an ongoing project at a lot of Sandbelt clubs that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's a bit of an ongoing, I guess, project and education process and awareness, right? When golfers start become aware of the alternatives. And I think that's where there's been some really good work done by vegetation managers at various different golf courses. We're working with, in particular, on the Sandbelt at the moment with Yarra Yarra and Woodlands. Two very different golf courses vegetation-wise. Two golf courses that have distinctly different ecological, what we call ecological vegetation classes of vegetation. Actually, the mix at Woodlands is unique to anything else on the Sandbelt, but and Yarra Yarra, to its credit, has pulled out a lot of what I almost call tree junk, introduced exotic species, and that happened through, the Renaissance golf work was removing a lot of the tree junk and getting it out of there, to the point we've almost got a clean slate to start with there at Yarra Yarra, of now getting back, even just simply on the ground plane, getting back native wallaby grasses instead of having other grasses there or couch there, just to get that contrast between irrigated mown couch and that sandy, grassy rough that browns off and goes yellow in summer and gives that great contrast, and also good, you can find your ball in it, right? So it's not a lush, thick rough that you might get in cooler, wetter climates of North America or, say, UK. So, and as I said, there's some really good people doing good work, professional people in the management team of these golf courses. Their working lives are dedicated just to vegetation. Which is great to see. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, you didn't have those people doing that so much. So it's and so that sort of focus, I guess, the awareness of the alternatives to tea tree is still a story to be sold and told, I think.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest areas of progress in Sandbelt golf recently, and you're definitely have been a part of that story. So very cool to hear about it from your perspective. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Harley. Very nice to talk to you.
Pleasure, Garrett. Anytime, it's been good fun. So thank you very much.
So I left off my history of Sandbelt golf with Royal Melbourne moving to Sandringham in 1901. This started a kind of trickle of golf clubs down to the Sandbelt from their original locations closer to the city. Next up was the Metropolitan Golf Club, which consisted of some former Royal Melbourne members, I believe, who didn't make the initial move. Metro arrived in the Sandbelt in 1908. Woodlands Golf Club was founded in the southern portion of the Sandbelt in 1913. And then in the 1920s, the trickle turned into a flood. Commonwealth Golf Club started in the Sandbelt in 1920, Kingston Heath in 1925, Victoria Golf Club and Yarra Yarra Golf Club in 1927. So suddenly you had quite a few golf courses on this excellent terrain in the Melbourne Sandbelt. So the last ingredient to make this a world-class golf region is, of course, architecture. Now, it seems to me that there was a good amount of local design talent in Melbourne. Kingston Heath was routed by a Scottish immigrant named Dan Suter, and he did an incredible job. Victoria Golf Club was designed by Bill Meter, a local banker, and Oscar Damon, a local shop owner. Again, awesome work by the two of them. But a major galvanizing moment for golf architecture in the Melbourne Sandbelt was a visit by Dr. Alister MacKenzie in October and November of 1926. Now, I've done a whole podcast episode on this visit by Alister MacKenzie. You can find that back in the Friday Golf Podcast archives. It's called something like the Good Doctor Goes Down Under. It was released a few years ago, but I went into more detail about Mackenzie's visit there, but really, really interesting subject. Mackenzie was technically there to design a new course for Royal Melbourne, which was moving from Sandringham to a property next door in Blackrock. And Mackenzie's main job while he was in Melbourne was to lay out this new course, which eventually became the famous West Course. But while he was in town, Royal Melbourne basically rented him out to several clubs to make design recommendations because they couldn't afford to just employ him during the entire duration of his stay. So Mackenzie ended up helping out with bunkering plans and other design issues at Victoria Golf Club, Kingston Heath, and the Metropolitan Golf Club. And to me, his influence on these places is really obvious. He introduced state-of-the-art strategic golf architecture to the Sandbelt, and that brought the region to another level. So the classic courses of the Melbourne Sandbelt, to my mind, are the West and East courses at Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, Victoria Golf Club, the Metropolitan Golf Club, Yarra Yarra, Commonwealth, and Huntingdale. These are almost always mentioned in any discussion of the Sandbelt. There are very few people who would deny that these courses should be considered, kind of the pillars of Sandbelt golf. I would also add to that group, though, Sandy Golf Links, which is right next door to Royal Melbourne and definitely looks and feels and plays like a Sandbelt golf course. I would add Sandy Golf Links to that group, as well as Spring Valley Golf Club, which is in the same area and, again, has enough similarities to classic Sandbelt courses to be considered one of them. Then south of this main area of the Sandbelt, you'll find a few more courses. Woodlands Golf Club, Peninsula Kingswood Country Golf Club, which has 36 holes, north and south courses, and Long Island, which is now owned by the National Golf Club. Sometimes these courses aren't mentioned in discussions of Sandbelt golf, but I think they should be. I think they belong in that category. So that's basically the scope of what I would consider the Melbourne Sandbelt. Now, from Melbourne, you can also drive to the Mornington Peninsula, where you'll find courses like St. Andrews Beach, the Dunes Golf Links, Portsea Golf Club, and 3 courses at the National Golf Club. You can also travel to the Bellarine Peninsula, where you can play 13th Beach Golf Links, which is the site of the Vic Open, Barwon Heads Golf Club, and Lonsdale Links. All definitely worth seeing. And, if you go to the Mornington Peninsula or the Bellarine Peninsula, one good thing is that many of the courses in those areas are public. And so you won't have to try too hard to gain access and book tee times. They'll be a little bit more accessible to travelers. So with that, I'd like to bring on my friend Lukas Michel to discuss his perspective on Sandbelt golf and what he thinks visitors should see and do in and around Melbourne. Lukas is one of my go-to advisors on Australian golf. He's very knowledgeable. He knows golf incredibly well, knows the area incredibly well, and it's just fun to talk to him. So let's go right over to Lukas Michel. Lukas Michel, welcome to the pod. Where are you right now?
I'm in Sydney. Thanks for having me, Garrett. I'm in Sydney.
Of course.
I'm at Eleanor Golf Club, just north of Sydney. We're building a short game area, and I've just jumped out of the excavator to come chat to you. So it's going well. I'm luckily able to stay on site, so it's not a big commute in the mornings. But yeah, having a bit of fun moving some dirt.
Thank you for spending the time with me. I appreciate it. We worked this out. I knew you were on the job, and we found a window where you could chat with me. Always kind of interesting to arrange the Australian versus the U.S. time zones, but we figured it out.
Yeah, made it happen. Yeah, no, happy to be on.
You're actually with the previous guest on this episode, Harley Cruz, and so he already talked to me about a different subject. You, Lukas, have always been, have been for years, one of my local sources on Sandbelt golf. I ask you a lot of questions. You've always been very generous in answering them. Melbourne is your adopted hometown, it's my understanding. Didn't you grow up in Perth?
Yeah, so I grew up in Perth, moved to Melbourne when I was 18, really for 2 reasons. To study, I started an engineering degree in Melbourne, but then also to pursue some competitive golf. Melbourne is really the capital golf city of Australia, and if I was going to get better at golf, I figured I needed to be on the East Coast, and Melbourne was the spot. So yeah, moved to Melbourne in 2012 and have been there ever since, and yeah, it's just a great place.
The region has produced so many great golfers. Peter Thompson, everybody knows about. Jeff Ogilvy knows about. You're in that lineage of golfer. Mike Clayton, you're in that lineage of golfers now as a U.S. Mid-Am winner. And so that's one thing that's really interesting about the Sandbelt is its way of producing great players with great golf courses and very like high golf IQ players come out of Melbourne too, probably because of the nature of the golf courses there. You're now very well traveled, right? So you've seen a lot of different regions of golf. When you think about the Sandbelt, what is distinctive about the golf architecture there? Well, like what is the thing that makes it the Sandbelt aside from the land, I guess?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a shock when I moved from Perth because I think the firmness of the turf was the biggest thing that I had to get used to. You know, understanding where a ball needs to land. You know, sometimes in front of a green, 20 yards short of a green, to release and finish near the hole. And then obviously there's contour on top of that, some really thoughtful contour on the ground. So you've kind of got those two factors. And coming from Perth, you know, I'd say Perth is probably firmer and faster than most places, but Melbourne was just on another level. So, and as I've travelled, I've definitely realised that is fairly unique to Melbourne. I was fortunate. I spent a semester abroad at St Andrews Uni and was there from August through December, and certainly in August, September, October, we had a nice dry fall, and it was lovely. And that was definitely probably the most similar I can think of to that style of golf. But I would definitely say, it's that firmness. I think it creates a golfer that is more used to thinking their way around a golf course. So think of Peter Thompson and Jeff and Mike Clayton. I think it was a real benefit to my game of spending a lot of time on a Sandbelt course, my home club Metropolitan, and then frequently playing Royal Melbourne, caddying at Royal Melbourne. I spent 5 or so years caddying there as well. So that kind of helps you think about how design works too.
You've constructed quite a life for yourself, spending time in Melbourne, going to university in St Andrews. Like I'm pretty jealous, to be honest, but firm and fast golf is what you get in both of those places. And at the Sandbelt in particular, I found when I went there last year, the first time I saw the ball leap into the air after landing was a real moment. I remember it because I was playing with you actually at Royal Melbourne's East Course. It was probably on the first hole when I landed the ball short of the green, and it's like a trampoline effect, and it changes the way that you play the golf courses. But then you add the design of the courses into that. And these courses are influenced by the strategic school of golf architecture as it was formulated in the early 20th century. And so you have bunkers guarding the ideal angles into greens. You have greenside bunkers sort of punishing players who are out of position in the fairway. And when you combine that architecture with the firm turf, you just get really interesting golf. The design doesn't have to be that complicated, right? It doesn't have to be anything fancy to be interesting, because you have firm turf, you have bunkers, you have hazards exactly where they should be to create strategic questions, and the golf courses just kind of go from there. The questions are relatively simple. It's generally, like you said, a classically strategic hole, but the way the courses play really exemplifies the architecture on the ground. And I would say Sandbelt golf courses, they probably don't have a ton of quirk compared to some of the courses you see, maybe the ones that were even built pre-Golden Age. You see a lot of really wacky features. I mean, maybe Metro's got a couple. I think you stood on the 9th fairway and looked at the mounds, and you were like, "Oh, Brian Schneider would love this." It was wild. Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's just like you said, just classically strategic architecture, and there's variations across the Sandbelt. Commonwealth is probably most known for the tilt in the greens, so that the greens will tend to tilt away from the player if you're playing from the less than ideal line. So that sort of does it more with tilt. Places like Metropolitan probably does it more with the bunkering, and it just varies across the sandbelt. Kingston Heath probably has a little bit more variety in the sort of architecture on the ground. Different strategic questions. It's not always bunkers on the inside of the dogleg. There's a couple. Well, the 12th hole has a bunker in the middle of the fairway. There's maybe a little bit more variety there, and there's a bit more blindness there as well, which is pretty cool. But like you said, it's classic strategic architecture combined with just awesome playability.
Yeah, I mean, Kingston Heath is so wonderful because the design is super intellectual. It's really varied from hole to hole. Like all the tools of strategic architecture are used at Kingston Heath. Then you go to Commonwealth, which I love, which you mentioned. Really love Commonwealth, but there the strategic concepts are very straightforward. Where you have that tilt, you have the bunkers and the right positions, and the question is, can you deal with all of that? And it makes for very interesting golf, but in a different way from Kingston Heath, in a different way from the West Course at Royal Melbourne, which is very complexly designed as well. The East Course has those incredible greens that you talked to me a lot about when we were playing them. The greens at the East Course are unbelievable, right?
I think as I kind of played the East Course more and more and caddied there as well, I think I sort of realized, there's greens like the 3rd, 10th, 11th, 16th and 18th that I think they're way more complex than you get on the West Course. And I think it must be, it came a little later than the West. I got to think that obviously Russell was left on his own with Morecambe to do the West and the East, sorry. And I think there's probably maybe Russell and Morecambe getting a little bit more confident in what they were doing and getting a little bit more creative there. But
they were experimenting. The greens are experimental for sure. You get that sense that he was like, well, let's try this.
Yeah. Whereas you look at, Yarra Yarra was, I think, built around the same time as the West, or maybe even maybe even finished before it, and so you don't have that complexity. And that was Russell, and I don't know actually who built it, but there's a big difference between the complexity of the greens at Yarra Yarra versus Royal Melbourne East. Not to say Yarras aren't great, but a green like 11 is probably one of the most intricately designed greens on the Sandbelt at Yarra Yarra. The East just I think is a notch higher in terms of green design.
There are probably some intricacies at Yarra Yarra in the greens that could be recaptured, but your general point is totally right. Yarra Yarra, I think, was 26 or 27, which is when the West Course was conceived, right? When Alister MacKenzie came through Australia and offered all of his suggestions for these courses. And the West Course was built according to Alister MacKenzie's plans, but not finished until the early 1930s. And that's when the East Course was finished too. And by the early 1930s, there's crazy stuff going on all around the world in golf architecture. Alister MacKenzie is building Augusta National with some of the craziest greens ever created. And there's a spirit of experimentation in early 1930s golf architecture, just as the industry is falling off a cliff and nobody can build anything anymore. Later in the 30s, you have Langford and Moreau come along in the U.S. and do some crazy stuff. And so maybe Alex Russell was kind of absorbing the spirit of the times. He was a very cosmopolitan guy. He probably kept track of what was going on in the golf industry, and who knows, the East Course greens might have been influenced by that, that atmosphere.
Yeah, I think as well, Morecambe clearly had an influence, because if you look at the Russell courses that were done outside of Melbourne, I was a member at Lake Carrinup in Perth, and before Mike Clayton went through there and redesigned, it was fairly rudimentary. And I think he did plans for that course in the 50s as well. I think he drew up green plans. I don't know if they were ever built, but he definitely reviewed the course. Russell did. So he built the course in, they built the course in the late 20s, and then I believe he went through and did a review and drew some more sketches in the 50s. But clearly when he didn't have Morecambe there, it just couldn't get built to that level. So I think when Clates went through, they used some of those sketches and then put a bit of their own flavour on the golf course.
So, Lukas, I have a few questions for you from members of Fried Egg Golf Club. I put a call out for questions related to, what it's like to visit the Sandbelt and how to kind of plan a Sandbelt trip, what it's like to try to get access to these clubs and travel to the area. So, starting with the golf part of it, this is a complicated question. This is a hard question to answer, but what do you think the priority is? Like, do you stick around the city and try to play as many Sandbelt courses as possible? Or do you sprinkle in some trips out to the Mornington Peninsula or even the Bellarine Peninsula? These are sort of the Hamptons areas of the Melbourne region with some great golf in their own right. What would be your approach if you had a week and a half to 2 weeks in the area? Would you go narrow and deep, or would you kind of spread out a little bit?
I think I would probably spread out. I think, the Sandbelt, it's a little homogenous once you get past, the top 2 or 3 or 4 courses. I think I would, the Sandbelt style, there is variety, a little bit of variety, like we talked about with Commonwealth, having the tilted greens versus, a Yarra Yarra or Metro or elsewhere. So I think I would definitely do 4 or 5 Sandbelt courses. And then I think there's so much good golf on the Mornington Peninsula. I think for that variety to spice up the trip a little bit, I think, you can't look past, your St Andrews Beach. If you can get on the National, the Gunnamatta or the Moona. And then, like you said, the Bellarine has some great golf now. Bowen Heads is really good, and Lonsdale Links is really fun. I wouldn't suggest going out to Port Fairy. That's about a 4-hour drive. But if you did want to
I've
go
heard
all the way out
incredible
there,
things about Port Fairy.
Yeah.
It looks like my kind of place.
It's really cool. You drive the Great Ocean Road to get there, so maybe that's an option if you've got a couple of days spare. You can go stay out there. But I would definitely throw in some interesting stuff. Even RACV Healesville. It's a course up north of Melbourne that Mike Clayton did with Mike Cocking probably 15, 20 years ago. And that's got some really fun green complexes, super different to what you'd see on the Sandbelt, heavy soils, but past 68 or 6 or something like that. I also wouldn't look past Sandy Golf Links. I think that's a really sort of in that shorter courses sort of thing. I think that's super, super fun. It's got every element of Royal Melbourne to it.
It's right next door.
Yeah. So it's superb.
I would beat the drum for Sandy Golf Links as well. I mean, it's so easy to work into an itinerary because it is a shorter course, a par. It's like a par 65 or 6 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a 6. I haven't broken par there. I've played it maybe
it's hard
7, 8, 9 times. It's so hard because there's no par 5s. So par 5s are where good players feast, and then you got lots of par 3s. And super firm surfaces and not a lot of bunkers, which I think actually makes it harder for good players because the ball runs away from the green and then there's so much complexity around the green. So, you're probably
right that is the factor. It is. I mean, the turf is maintained by the Royal Melbourne team. The courses are right next door to each other, and they have a very nice deal from the perspective of Royal Melbourne to kind of co-maintain the courses and. Yeah, so the turf is like what you get at Royal Melbourne for all intents and purposes. The design's great. They redid it a few years ago and turned it into a true Sandbelt course. So definitely would recommend that. And there's so much good golf in the area around. It's a little bit hard to wrap your arms around it. But I think I like your approach. It's the sort of the approach that I took where you try to see as much Sandbelt golf as possible because that's the unique thing about the area. You won't find it anywhere else. St Andrews Beach is an incredible golf course, but it is like the Bandon courses, more so than the Sandbelt courses are like the Bandon courses. But I think St Andrews Beach is one of Tom Doak's best golf courses.
Yeah,
it's one of the 3 or 4 best of his that I've that I've seen, and so getting out there and seeing that would it would really spice up the trip. And then you guys are working at Portsea right now, right?
Correct.
And
that's a
and
cool.
It's a cool place.
Yeah, that is a cool place. It probably doesn't have the design complexity of in certainly the design of the greens and bunkers, but
yeah,
the
it's like a
routing's really solid.
1950s.
Yeah, solid routing, great land, some of the best land you could ever imagine for golf. Spectacular setting, and
beautiful.
luckily we're working with them, and hopefully we can make some slight improvements on what they've already got.
Yeah, I think they're pretty close to having something very special and worth traveling out to the tip of the Mornington Peninsula to see it. So yeah, I mean, so much good stuff, and I guess that doesn't answer the question in like a firm way for people who want to travel there, but the basic message is you can't really go to this region and not do a little bit of traveling around. And seeing the varieties of golf.
Yeah, and depends what you're into, but there's some good wineries down on the Mornington Peninsula. You can make that a trip. Like I said, the Great Ocean Road, if you do happen to go Bellarine side, is not that far from where Lonsdale and those courses are. So there's definitely other elements to the trip. It doesn't have to be 100% golf if you're interested in other things.
Yeah. Yeah, great wine region. It's I mean, just on top of everything else, there's good Pinot Noir specifically in the Melbourne region. All right, and this is a question from my colleague Bo Scroggins. Can you think of any other cluster of courses in the world that you feel play similarly to Sandbelt courses? What's kind of the closest thing elsewhere to the Sandbelt?
It's probably, if you get a good summer, the London Heathlands, I would say.
It's got to be, right?
Yeah, I played the Walton Heath Trophy in a couple of years, actually, 2015 when I went over to St Andrews, and then maybe like 2017. And I actually don't know what the soils are there. They may be clay because it was so firm. Like when the clay dried out, the ball was bouncing
late summer, kind of like
unbelievable. So I think a dry summer on the London Heathlands. I think it's sort of got that aesthetic too, with the sort of heathland style vegetation as well.
You talk about Sandbelt maybe lacking a little bit of architectural quirk because so many of the courses were built in the 20s when golf architecture had become more professionalized and codified. I think that would be probably the reason why you see so many Sandbelt courses looking kind of clean and coherent in their aesthetic. The Heathlands doesn't have that character.
Yeah.
There's some bizarre stuff out there because the course has evolved from basically the 1890s through the 1920s, and West Sussex has its own completely weird perspective on golf architecture. I didn't go out there, but I was told afterwards I should have.
Okay. Cool.
And so interesting comparison between those two regions. All right, here's a question from a Friday Golf Club member named Tim Shermer. He wants a little more information on the quote unquote lesser known courses of the Sandbelt. Everybody knows about Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath. To an extent, everybody knows about Victoria, knows about Metropolitan, where you're a member. When you think about courses like Commonwealth, Woodlands, Huntingdale, I don't know if you would consider Long Island part of the Sandbelt, but that's next door to Peninsula Kingswood, the 36 holes at Peninsula Kingswood, south of what you would traditionally call the Sandbelt. What do those courses have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about Commonwealth already, but Woodlands, I can't remember if you got out there to Woodlands.
I did.
I think you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Woodlands is, probably there's a little bit of difference in the vegetation there. It's on maybe a slightly different. They call them EVCs. It's like ecological vegetation community, I think is the name for it.
It's a little south of like the classic Sandbelt. It's south of Royal Melbourne.
A little bit, a little bit.
It's like it's sort of between Royal Melbourne and Peninsula Kingswood, right? Peninsula
Yeah.
Kingswood's about 30 minutes south of
Yeah.
Victoria and Royal Melbourne, and then
Yeah.
Woodlands is sort of in between.
Yeah, and so, I mean, architecturally, any photo you'd see of the place looks distinctively Sandbelt. It's got those flared up bunkers with flash sand. It's got the fescue surrounds just like Royal Melbourne, so you can bounce a ball in really well. Green's always firm. We're actually doing a little bit of work there with the vegetation because it got a little bit crowded with tea tree over the years. But yeah, superb golf course. The fourth hole's one of the best courses on the Sandbelt, one of the quirkiest golf holes on the Sandbelt, actually.
So
just
weird.
a really wild piece of
Bunkerless,
design.
short par
Yeah.
4 with a
Yeah.
green that's you can't
Yeah.
hit it from any angle.
I hit it. I played there about a week ago. I hit it pin high left to a front pin, which is about 6 paces wide and stands about 5 feet above all the surrounds. So to actually hit the green from that position, pin high left, was impossible. I putted it straight over the top of the pin and went straight to the other side. And I was basically playing ping pong from each side of the green. So crazy hole. Like if you built it today, I just don't think you could. I think you would. That would blow it up.
It would get
within
softened.
2 years. Yeah, exactly.
At
Exactly.
modern green speeds, this was it was built, a long time ago. But it's so interesting because it has survived in its
Correct.
current form.
Correct. So Woodlands just to see the fourth almost, but some great short fours there as well. You didn't bring up Spring Valley, but that's probably worth seeing. They're going through like a bit of a green restoration project, but that's got some really good holes on some great land. Very sort of Kingston Heathy sort of type land. Just doesn't quite have the budget, and there are a couple holes down, in a more of a wetland area that aren't quite as good, but some really good stuff there. We talked about Sandy.
Sandy belongs in this group, and
yeah. Even like it might be a little bit harder to get on, but if you're counting Long Island as well, which I haven't seen yet, obviously they're going through a major renovation at the moment, but if we're counting Long Island, then just another 5 minutes south is a little place called Frankston Golf Club, which has elements of Sandbelt to it. It's really difficult to get a good history on the place. I've heard stories that Russell did it, but it's got some really cool elements, and it's one of the coolest club models I think I've ever seen. It's a little bit like the Dunes Club. Like there's like 2 staff. There's there's no one manning the clubhouse, so you just put your beers in the fridge when you get there. There's an outdoor barbecue set that you cook your meal on, and the rule of the club is to leave it as you found it. So everyone does their own dishes and goes out and plays golf, and like I said, leave it as you found it. And it's sort of the model as well of the club in general. They've basically not touched the golf course for, I guess, almost 100 years. So in a way, the vegetation, if you leave it as you found it, you're not quite leaving the vegetation as you found it because it grows. But outside of just clearing a little bit of vegetation, it's a really, it's super charming place. And certainly if you can get on there, I'd recommend trying.
You're barely even supposed to talk about Frankston, is the impression that I got when I was in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Because
It's a
combination of very private, but also, as you say, very casual, where it's it's just the kind of club you'd want to be part of because it's so efficient, and it's how golf clubs used to be, without all the amenities, and
Correct.
so that's I'm glad you mentioned that one. I love Woodlands. Woodlands is so cool because the architecture is a little bit different. Like the way the greens are designed is a little bit different than the rest of the Sandbelt courses. It's a little more modern, a little more mid-century around the greens, where you can see the artificiality a bit, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's just a different style, and I think the way that the greens play is very fun and interesting as well. And then it's just more treed. It's more enclosed. The holes are more enclosed is the word, and so there's not this feeling of open heathland as much as some other courses. but it's very beautiful, and the combination of the forest and the underlying vegetation is very, very pretty, and I was impressed by it. I thought it was definitely worth visiting. Woodlands is that was one of my most fun days on the trip. All right, so another question from Tim Shermer. He asks about handling kind of travel within Melbourne, within Australia. I'm going to assume, like I would, that you would recommend renting a car while you're there.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably stay in the Sandbelt region if you're only doing the Sandbelt courses and just Uber. Most of the courses are near train lines, so you could even train it from closer to town if that was something you'd be interested in doing. But yeah, renting a car is pretty easy. It's a city set up for driving mostly. So, and if you're
going to go to the Mornington Peninsula,
correct, it's a must, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The courses, it's really appealing, the idea of not renting a car if you're going to go to the Sandbelt, because the Sandbelt courses themselves are obviously extremely close together. When you look at them on a map, you're like, oh my God, all these places are right next door to each other. But yes, if you want to go to St. Andrews Beach, that's a bit of a drive. And you just have to get used to, if you're coming from the U.S., get used to driving on the other side of the road, which I was not used to on the first day. That I think you followed behind me when we were going to a restaurant, and I was struggling to find the right lane to be in.
It's just when you turn, like, it just
exactly.
I've gotten used to it. I go to the US obviously a lot now, and I just
exactly,
flick a switch and I'm fine. But that first day you've got to be concentrated. You can't be distracted. If you take a phone call or listen to a podcast while you're trying to drive, you'll do something wrong.
This is my number one piece of advice to any Americans going to Australia or the UK for that matter, is that when you're driving, don't put people in danger. Just like focus on driving only, because it will take all of your attention to navigate it at first, unless you're experienced with it. So in terms of accommodations, I stayed at Victoria Golf Club, and I believe they're shutting down their accommodation. That's no longer going to be available. If you were traveling to Melbourne, where would you stay? Would you stay in the city, or would you try to be closer to the courses?
I think, I mean, say you were doing the trip where you play some Mornington Peninsula golf courses as well. You could maybe stay a day or two in the city at the front end, and then maybe you move to Peninsula Kingswood, has some good accommodation. You could stay there, and you could almost stay there to do the Mornington Peninsula courses, because it's only about 30-40 minutes from there to drive down there. And it's great accommodation. There's 2 courses at PK. So, you could, stay and play there a bunch. But then, still be able to commute both ways potentially. But there's enough stuff to see in the city as well. Just Melbourne's a cool town. Downtown Melbourne, as Lamagna would call it, which it actually is a proper downtown.
You're referring to when my colleague Joseph Lamagna was in Northern Ireland and referred to downtown Portrush, and it went crazy on TikTok.
But the Melbourne CBD, as we call it, we don't say downtown.
Melbourne does have a legitimate downtown. Let's be clear.
It does.
This is a city of like a metro area of 5 million people or so. Yeah.
Correct. So there's some things worth doing in the Melbourne CBD.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute. The Peninsula Kingswood accommodation is kind of the new kid on the block, right? The Victoria, rooms that I stayed in were perfect for what I was looking for, because they were very basic, bare bones. There was a laundry machine. It was all I needed, and really nothing more. Peninsula Kingswood is going to be a little more upscale in terms of its accommodation, and this is where international golf travel is going, right? The places that offer the more bare bones accommodations are going to have a hard time competing with the places that are offering more luxury. And I think that's the direction that Peninsula Kingswood is going in. So, it's pricey, but you're right that location, if you're doing a Melbourne golf trip and you're going to sample some of the Mornington courses and then the Sandbelt courses, is basically the perfect location, because you're right in between the two. The other option, I guess, would be to find a cool place in Melbourne to stay, play the Sandbelt courses, then relocate out to Portsea or something like that. They have a nice, very lovely hotel out at Portsea that you could stay in, and then get to all the Mornington courses fairly efficiently.
Sorrento's
so those
a good
are kind of the two
town
options
as well. Yeah, so Sorrento's got some good accommodation options down there. That's sort of the bigger town on the Mornington Peninsula that's quite nice. I think they've got an Intercontinental, which is like, obviously a bit more high end. So, but yeah.
Sorrento's a high end kind of town, isn't it?
It is a little bit, yeah. Portsea almost is as well, but it's a little bit smaller. Just doesn't quite have everything.
Yeah. Okay, something that Melbourne is famous for is coffee. So, again, you've been all around the world. You've had American coffee, which Australians are constantly disparaging, and I understand why. What is it about Melbourne coffee? Like, why do people just take it really seriously in the city?
I think so. I learnt to make coffees. I was working at a golf course driving range, and we made coffees. And even at a golf course, driving range, we were taught really well. Like, people would come in and teach us how to make coffee. Because if you don't make good coffee in Melbourne, no one will drink your coffee. They'll just buy it somewhere else because it's just so competitive. So
one of the assistant pros made me a cup of like a flat white at Victoria, and just went in and then handed it to me, and it was delicious. I was like, where am I? This is not golf course coffee.
Yeah, it's part of the culture, and I guess all the golf clubs, like, if you drank a coffee at Metropolitan and it was no good, like, the members are going to tell the the staff, because Melbourne people, I guess, now just know coffee. So it's definitely a cultural thing. I barely drink coffee outside of home. I've got a decent home setup. But so I tend to make a lot of coffee, and I enjoy that. Buying the beans from a local cafe that I know has good beans, and sort of doing it myself. But it's just a cultural thing, I think.
So you don't really know the local spots as much because you make more coffee at home.
Yeah, around the Sandbelt, there's a little place behind Yarra Yarra Golf Club called Humble Creatures, and it's pretty humble, but they do great food as well. So if you had to grab a bacon and egg roll before golf, a lot of golf clubs don't really do breakfast. So if you had to grab something before golf, that might be a good spot. There's another place in St Kilda, a friend of mine, is a Kingston Heath member, actually owns it. It's called Jerry's Milk Bar. They do some really good food and great coffee too. The place I get beans in Oakley, which is near Metropolitan, is called Cote Terra. And that's I love the beans there, and they make great coffee. So there's definitely, you almost can't go wrong, like I said, because it's so cultural. Like, the top end, it's pretty flat. Like, there's a lot of good places making good coffee. So I can't really say there's a standout, because they're all really good.
They're all good. Yeah, this is I think you told me this, and I was just like, all right, I'll just go get coffee anywhere. And right around the Victoria and Royal Melbourne, there's a place called Fabrica that I was a big fan of. They make really good coffee, and then they had excellent lunch offerings.
Yeah, that's the thing. The brunch, sort of cafe lunch brunch culture, pretty strong too. Like, good food in those sorts of places for a reasonable price. So.
It's the genre of cafe that there's a lot of. Yeah, a couple of my favorite things right there: brunch food and coffee. And then on a kind of one of the main streets by Victoria, there's a place called Two Bob Snob that I went to a few times. That was good as well. So that was the coffee was great. And you basically, as an American going in there, sometimes you don't know what to order. It's not really about drip coffee. It's about the espresso based drinks. It's
correct.
A flat white or something like
100%.
that.
Yep.
Yeah. Restaurant scene in Melbourne. It's a big. You can't really sum it up, obviously. Where would you suggest people start looking if they want to find a good restaurant?
Well, I think if there's one place I would look down is Flinders Lane in the city. So that's where there might be 50 restaurants on a laneway. But a couple of the spots I've been to that are really good, you've got a sort of Japanesey fusion place called Supernormal. Gimlet is another one, a bit different, French, sort of modern French. That's another one there. But I mean, you can't go wrong there. The Chin Chin's another one, another sort of Asian fusion. There's a ton of great restaurants on Flinders Lane, so that's probably the place in the city. And then Chapel Street is a pretty vibrant street in sort of Prahran, South Yarra. So that's a good spot. Plenty of restaurants there as well. Different sort of vibe, very young and hip, I would say. You're probably not going to want to go north of town just because, maybe not because you won't be staying that side, but Brunswick and Carlton, and there's great stuff around those areas as well.
Okay.
Outside of the city or outside of the city and surrounds, if you're wanting something quick after golf near the Sandbelt, Oakley, which is where I actually live, it's a little bit of a Greek hub. Like Melbourne has got a very large Greek population. I think it's like in a city, it's the largest outside of Athens, or I don't know what the population of Athens, but there's a ton of Greek people, and they're all centered around Oakley. So if you want a great Greek meal, you can't go wrong in Oakley. There's probably 15 Greek restaurants in a little hub, just about 2 minutes from Metropolitan Golf Club. So that's
want
a really
a
good option.
Greek meal.
Yeah.
I missed it while I was there. That's too bad. I love.
So that's a good option
food.
Post golf if you have to head that way and towards town.
Okay, in Oakley.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. So, getting back to more kind of golf focused questions, practical for people who are planning a trip to Melbourne and trying to figure out where to play. This is a question from Friday Golf Club member Jonathan Fuchs, which is the name of a character in Barry as well. So great last name. So he's basically asking, how receptive are the local private clubs to visitors these days? This may have changed within the last few years with COVID. There is some accessibility for the top private Sandbelt clubs, but it's become more complicated, right?
I think so. I don't quite know, but I think if you have plenty of notice and you contact like director of golf at insert golf club name, Kingston Heath, Metropolitan, Royal Melbourne, I think they're receptive. It's just time of year and play restrictions. So I would say get in with probably, if you can, 12 months advance notice. Because it is limited, member plays prioritized. But yeah, I think with enough notice and obviously Saturday tends to be the day of the week where you can't. I think maybe Royal Melbourne might do a little bit because they've got the two courses. But Saturdays are difficult, but any other day, Saturday, if you can arrange it, maybe that's the day to go down to the Mornington Peninsula and play one of the public options, or maybe it's Sandy Golf Links, you can work in something like that. But I think they're still pretty receptive to international play.
That's kind of what I found. I come from a different perspective than I guess the average traveler to Melbourne would, because I knew a lot of members of Sandbelt clubs before I went, and so I arranged the rounds through them, and very generously people took me out on their courses, and the guest rates are much lower than the standard visitor rate would be. But my understanding is that, especially if you're a member of a club and you're being introduced by your pro or have some kind of letter of introduction, I don't know, then you should be able to find a way onto even your Royal Melbournes or your Kingston Heaths. Once you get there, it's an expensive round if you're an unaccompanied guest, but it is definitely possible to play these courses. And I would say playing the West Course at Royal Melbourne is worth it. This is like maybe the greatest golf course in the world. Yeah. Go ahead and pay that visitor fee. It's incredible, and you won't regret it. There are also, you can time your trip with tournaments that are held at these courses as well, and that's a great way to see Royal Melbourne too. And so that's something I'd recommend. But you pointed it out with the Mornington Peninsula courses. You'll find more public courses on the Mornington Peninsula. and that's part of what's so appealing about that area. And you can just kind of schedule some time down there as well. As I've said before, you've been all over the world, seeing a lot of different kinds of golf clubs. What are Australian golf clubs like in terms of their culture?
So I would say they're actually pretty big. Like, you've got 1,200 members or so is one aspect I think that an American listener probably wouldn't expect maybe, so they're busy. They're pretty vibrant and busy places. So, a Saturday there might be 200 plus players playing. That tends to be the big club days for most golf courses in Melbourne. But, very social, very busy, lots of golf. They're doing 50,000 plus rounds even at the top clubs. But yeah, golf culture is definitely, pace of play is prioritized at Metro. I don't think I've played in over 4.25 hours in a comp day, in groups of 4 with 9-minute tee intervals. So people play fast. I think there's a pride of playing fast, particularly those first few groups that go out. I think they try and see how much they can beat the guys behind them, get 10, 15 minutes ahead of them. But yeah, I think, when you come down, make sure you play fast. Don't take too long. Don't hold up members.
It's the ultimate thing that you gotta fit with the pace of the.
Yeah. So that's probably a big aspect, and people love competition as well. So there's daily competitions on where people are asking each other what they shot, and that's sort of a big part of the culture as well.
Is there a good amount of foursomes?
No, not a ton. Definitely not as much as those sort of British clubs that do a bit more.
That's my understanding, because Australia, the Australian clubs like medal competition, right?
Correct. I think Royal Melbourne has like rules around, certain days a week before certain times. It's 2 balls only, so you might see a little bit more foursomes play because 4 people can go out and play, just 2 balls. So I think that happens maybe a little bit there, but we have a couple annual events at Metropolitan that are foursomes and super fun. But yeah, that's probably about it for foursomes golf.
You've mentioned Metropolitan a couple of times. You're a member there. Question from Friday Golf Club member Joshua Ralston, who I think may have played with at some point. Yeah. How there was a renovation at Metropolitan by Crafter and Mogford, an Australian firm with Neil Crafter, who's a great golf historian. I visited the course with you in the middle of this renovation. Is that work done? And if so, how is it looking?
Yeah, so that finished the course opened in April. So it was a pretty quick build or turnaround. They did the front 9 last year and then finished the back 9 earlier this year. It's all bedded in well. The course is in really good condition. We just had our club championships a couple of weeks ago and it was in great shape for that. So yeah, the course is definitely back in play, and would recommend, if you want to play Metro, now's a good time to play it because it's in great shape.
Also, the firm Ogilvy, Cocking and Mead, OCM, did work at Huntingdale, I believe, which is another great Sandbelt club. Is that work done?
That's opening, I believe, for the members in December. I don't know when it would be open for visitor play, but I think...
So for this coming season, basically.
Yeah, there's some discussions, between Metropolitan and Huntingdale. There's a potential merger on the table. And so I think we're getting an early look at it in January, potentially. But yeah, that's probably the big hot button item at both clubs at the moment, which is interesting.
Looking forward to seeing that, because that's the only Sandbelt course top Sandbelt course that I didn't really see. So should be interesting. There's also an ongoing project with OCM at Long Island, which is next door to Peninsula Kingswood. And that's a very creative, ambitious renovation where there are different alternate routes that are being created around the golf course, holes within holes, courses within courses. And that's a very interesting project as well. You're working out at Woodlands. What's the scope out there?
Probably more vegetation based at Woodlands. So, a lot of the I mean, it is in that sort of, you talked about it, has a great sort of atmosphere of playing amongst the woodlands, I guess it's a very apt name.
Beautiful, yeah.
But the coastal tea tree there is pretty, well, it's an invasive species actually outside of the strip of coastline right next to the ocean. And it's, it can be useful of a plant in certain areas strategically, but at the end of the day, if your ball goes in it, you're probably not seeing it again, or you're really struggling to recover out of it. So it's not a great golf plant, I would say, particularly when it matures and gets really bushy. So there's selective sort of pruning of that stuff throughout the course happening, and then regenerating heathland, because as soon as you take that out, there's a lot of native seed bank left under it.
Yeah. Volunteers.
So that's, yeah, correct. So that's, and we're doing something a little bit similar. It's almost the reverse though at Yarra Yarra. Renaissance Golf Design came through and did all the architectural works, and then hired Harley Cruz, myself, and Mike Clayton to tackle the revegetation aspects of it. So it's almost like, we're putting a bit more of the Sandbelt vegetation onto that place, and maybe stripping a little bit of the more invasive stuff off of woodlands. And certainly not to try and make them feel similar or anything. They're always going to have a distinctive feel, but in both cases, getting them a little bit back to a more natural state.
That'll be great for Yarra Yarra. That's really the kind of missing piece there, because what a cool golf course. I really enjoyed Yarra Yarra quite a bit. And with some of the regenerated heathland, I think it would bring it together very nicely.
Yeah.
And then finally, so Commonwealth was also a recent project, not by you, but by Renaissance Golf Design, and Tom Doak's, one of Tom Doak's experienced associates, Brian Slonick, did what I thought was a great project at Commonwealth. And so that's fairly new, reopened before I visited, and so that's available as well. A lot of the Sandbelt courses are rounding into vintage form, which is very exciting. Last one for you, Lukas. You've worked a lot with Mike Clayton and Mike DeVries at 7 Mile Beach in Tasmania. This would be another idea for a Melbourne trip. If somebody goes a little more, has more time, more ability to travel, it's not that hard to get to Tasmania from Melbourne. It's a lot easier to get there than it is to get there from anywhere else. And there are some amazing golf courses on Tasmania now. You have Barnbougle Dunes out on the island, on a nearby island. There's Cape Wickham, and a lot of really cool golf options. 7 Mile Beach is a place that you've been working at quite a bit, and it's just opening now, kind of right nearby the Hobart International Airport. How's that project looking, and what does the future look like there?
Yeah, so I think they're looking at opening to public December 4th. So there's tee times you can book now, basically tee times. Yeah. I was there on Thursday, Friday last week, and we actually were the first. It was a Society of Australian Golf Course Architects meeting, and we were the first people to play the full 18 holes, which was pretty cool. I think Matt and a few of the ownership group have played a full 18, but we were the sort of first, I guess, non-ownership group to play it. And yeah, it's looking really good. They've had constant water challenges throughout the build. That's been the real struggle. So, the condition in spots is still not quite right. They're actually closing it down for about 3 weeks of November to get everything prepped for the opening. But yeah, I mean, the greens are superb. It's just, little bits of the fairways, maybe aren't fully grown in, but they've got a really secure water source coming online, hopefully in December. So yeah, by, late summer, it should be really, really, really good, I think. I found it was quite fun playing with, some golfers of different abilities. And I found it quite a challenge, but the course only has maybe 35 bunkers. So there's not a lot of challenge, well, not a lot of penalty from a bunkers perspective. But I would say keep it out of the marram grass. I think that's going to be the
dunes,
challenge.
That's right. You don't need bunkers really when you're...
Yeah. So I think, looking at it, there was a few things I was like, okay, we probably need to, if we can, just get the marram right off the edge of the fairways as much as possible. So I think there'll be some, like any golf course when it opens, there's bits and pieces that you do. So, if you're coming in the first few months of opening, I would say, remember it's a brand new golf course, but
Right.
I think it's going to blow people away. It's absolutely spectacular. What Mike's done with, what both Mikes, but particularly Mike DeVries has done with the greens. I mean, there's some of the best green complexes I've seen anywhere. It's just unbelievable.
Must have been fun to see him work. He's one of the best green shapers in the world.
He is. Yeah, he's great. And I mean, I spent about 8 months down there with him, and I barely got to touch a green because that was just Mike's space. Just leave him alone, let him do that thing. So I was watching from afar, but it was a really cool experience.
Nice. All right, Lukas, that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for your time. It's always fun to talk with you, and good luck with your future projects.
Thanks, Garrett. Appreciate it.
This episode of Designing Golf was produced by Will Balsam. Thank you, Will. Are you enjoying designing golf? If so, I can just about guarantee that you would love what we're doing in Fried Egg Golf Club. Now, the latest from Fried Egg Golf Club is that we now have a community discussion forum. So if that's something that you're interested in, check out thefriedegg.com/membership and see everything that comes with a Fried Egg Golf Club subscription/membership. Lots of fun stuff happening in there. We're building a great community of avid golfers, and we would love for you to be a part of it. So check that out. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.